Hi, I'm Larry Dignan with Constellation Insights, and we're coming to you from AWS Summit New York. We got Liz Miller, Mike Nee, Holger, Mueller, and we're going to tell you everything you need to know about AWS Summit. Who wants to kick us off? It was a very practical summit.
It was very practical.
A very practical summit.
Fantastic logistics, is that what you mean?
Now.
Get to know New York. Get to know New York in July. But okay, we got this one out. Let's
clear,
focus.
Right? The AI isn't just in the lab anymore. I think AWS CEO Andy Jassy said by video later on that we're moving from POCs to deployed solutions, and this is a message we're definitely hearing from the executives we work with who are looking to scale and get real about their AI initiatives.
I thought it was funny though. I think that they're definitely in the practical zone. They are providing builders and developers with the tools that are going to best get them to where they need to be. Lots of those announcements around how to make it real. What I thought was so interesting were just how many partners were emphasizing just how much stuff doesn't get out of that POC world, right? And this is something that we as Constellation have been talking about for a really, really long time. In fact, when we surveyed executives really at the start of this year, really tail end of last year, the number one thing that came through those numbers loud and clear was not just that they were not extracting those POCs into production and scale, they weren't extracting value, right? You only had about 4% of executives saying that they were getting the most value out of their AI investments and that they weren't really moving those into wide-scale production. What I thought was really refreshing about the AWS conversations, whether it was from the main stage during the keynotes, whether it was during announcements, and yes, you can take Andy Jassy out of AWS, but you can't take, you can't take him out of these summits.
He's always hovering. Right? He's hovering.
He's always there. This is his baby, right? He's not.
The Jassy spirit is strong.
Totally. Andy Jassy is not allowing AWS to run around New York like we did, sweating, hot, trying to find bikes, where to park them. But he was really there, and you could tell how proud he was of that practicality and what was being introduced. But I think what was really interesting was it was not just about how do you get it built, how do you scale it? There were a lot of conversations about how to extract that value and how to start thinking differently, even at the business user level. Because for me, when I look at AWS, I certainly think of things like Connect. How do you start to extract that value, and how do you look at it beyond that surface level of the first place you implemented or the first place you experimented? How do you start to have that scale across your business and really mean something very, very useful and valuable?
What's your take, Holger?
I agree with everything. Want to focus a little more on the announcement that happened here, and you can see that finally, you might say, right? I mean, AWS, let's step back for a second, right? In 2023, had this grandiose, the biggest from all the cloud vendors ambition with Q, right? So broken down into Q business, Q developer, Q whatever, right? And obviously building something bigger will take a little longer. And that's what we're seeing basically with AWS now, at AWS Summit New York, putting forward the building blocks of an agentic framework, right? I mean, we've seen agentic frameworks being released since about a year by now, right? But it's very important that AWS made the step away from Bedrock, which was before Q, right, around there as the model ability to get everything done in AI, because you have to emancipate this, because AWS wants to be the Switzerland of models, so it cannot be in AWS Bedrock. It has to be beyond that in its own framework, and that's what we see now with Agent Core. And the ironic thing, I just realized it's getting more oxygen to my brain riding down the elevators here at the Marriott Marquis where we're all staying, is that traditionally, right, people have been criticizing AWS by now that it's too much of a Chinese menu, too many little servers to put together. Ironically, this is working now in their favor as we're in this early phase of AI, where companies want to experience, need to experience, don't need completely bold assumption-making platforms, which may be a fit and everything's wonderful, or may not be a fit and it's not the right platform for me, right? So with this Lego block and Agent Core, they're doing a significant major step, right? The other key thing, and it's partially between Mike and me, right, which is a major announcements, which doesn't get enough airtime, is that they're putting vectors on S3, right? S3 being the place where you put your stuff, hopefully not leaky, but safe buckets on AWS. And now you can access them from AI algorithms. So the major part, and you see, like, we're now over 1.5 years after the announcement of Q that this is coming forward, that finally the architecture piece, the architecture puzzle is coming together for what AWS will do in the next years to come. That's very, very important for customers deciding what their AI and agentic platform is.
I think the thing
Well, yeah, I
stuck
mean, I
out-
think Holger, if there's one thing that brings, Agent Core, you saw them talking about, long running workload support. You have like up to 8 hours and complete session isolation with, a bunch of the industry leading features that they've been pulling together over the years. And these are things that save developers a ton of time and giving that level of, reliability, that level of ability to contain, govern, and scale. And again, getting that level of maturity to be able to deploy these agents at scale over long-running processes.
It's what's going to make them work, right? It's what's going to.
Yeah.
We see this battle between I have a longer context window, I have a longer prompt window, and so on. That all matters to make things work better and to make them this what our founder and fearless leader likes, the ambient intelligence around us, right? If I don't have a context window which is as long as a human, at least for the day, at least for the session, I cannot help that human AI because you always start from scratch, right? Which reminds me that it was interesting. We had a showcase on the Analyst Summit about the internal AWS uptake in different areas. And one big one where there's super relevance, of course, Alexa, right? Which is a kind of like AWS's or Amazon's Trojan horse to get tons of data experience out there with Alexa Plus to help consumers and some business aspects too, right? We all know the win is automated. We go to reinvent with Alexa, is it business or not, is it consumer? But that will be super relevant to get the information about the long running context window of 8 hours. And 8 hours might be too short because we are up for longer than 8 hours, right? So, it's Alexa morning shift, it's afternoon shift, it's nighttime shift.
Well, I mean, you have to think about how this gets into just understanding the lineage and even the metadata that support the agent-oriented, originated decisions.
This is like water cooler.
Well, I think one hidden gem is actually your point, Holger, was, and it wasn't actually announced, but we heard about it later as we talked about it. I think it's worth raising was real-time metadata sync in SageMaker Catalog. There was a bunch of SageMaker Catalog announcements, and some may have missed that, this is one that's about real-time automated synchronization between Glue Data Catalog and SageMaker Catalog. And this is where, why it matters. It's a massive reduction in friction. It's also a pointer in the direction of where, Amazon, as well as a bunch of others, have to go, which is really bringing the technical metadata. How do you think about where all your data sits and the business meaning of it? And how do you actually bring that ecosystem of not just Amazon, but others to start sharing in terms of how do we actually leverage all of this big data real estate?
At a high level, stuck out to me. At a high level, what stuck out to me was just the difference between enterprise AI developers and the other developers. Like AWS is meeting them where the enterprises are right now. And the reality is we're getting, some new model every other week and no one cares. Like, I don't care if some new model is 0.0006 better at math than the other one. It doesn't matter. And that's the world we're going to. And I think the framework that AWS put out there is practical, arguably boring, yet necessary if you're going to run this stuff out there. And
they did the boring infrastructure as a service stuff for the AI era. That's basically what Agent Core is, right? With a little bit of peeking into past. The next phase, probably at reInvent, is going to be interesting what's going to happen there and what the relationship between SageMaker, right? This was the first event in the AI era and even before the Gen AI era where SageMaker wasn't front and center, right? So which shows the evolution of AWS product portfolio in the AI era, that SageMaker is no longer everything, which is good news, right? Which is key for progression maturization.
What's everybody's
Well, I think they're holding those announcements back a little bit. And you certainly see little hints of it coming up when you really dig in there.
What's everybody's take on Nova and the customization stuff? Are we in the era of good enough LLMs? Private label
I don't even
LLMs?
think that it's. I don't even think it's a matter of that. I think it's a matter of, we might be in the era of good enough, but we haven't yet hit that era for most part, of actually using them and actually putting them into use beyond kind of those isolated efficiency plays, right? We aren't seeing, like, we see it and we're like, ooh, that's super cool. What I think we saw here, which I think is really important, is how all the things that Holger and Mike were just talking about, all the infrastructure, the data, the metadata, how all that comes together. Where we saw that really come to life, where it's getting used, and just how far you can take it and how quickly you can take it is in places like Amazon Connect, right? So think of this as their engagement suite and their customer engagement suite. Their first use case and where it's really starting is in the customer contact center. You have a scenario where, one of the Nova announcements was in contact center. You really now have the capacity to translate. So we now have the capacity to look at models like Nova Sonic, which is their voice and their kind of their audio foundation model. It is now beyond, that English, that the North American English only perspective, as Holger would talk about it. And now
es spricht Deutsch. Nova spricht Deutsch.
Right. It speaks German, right? So I think we have a space where you can say, being able to move in a really practical manner and being able to expand with these foundation models is really showing how you then expand and then you apply and then you scale, right? It has been a very measured approach. Amazon has not been the organization that has thrown LLMs against a wall and then just hoped that something cool was going to come from it. It has been very intentional, and their applications have been very intentional. We saw a great panel on our analyst day that spread across Amazon, right? It was AWS, but it was also Amazon Business. It was also Amazon Advertising. It was also Prime. It was also retail, right? And what you saw from that view is how everyone is building on top of those innovations. And those Nova models are really foundational to that. So Nova Canvas is really looking at bringing that try-on perspective into a lot of their customers' retail environments. And you could argue, listen, we've been able to do that type of computer vision. We've been able to do that type of image generation for some time now. But now, if you can build this, if you have put in that infrastructure and you've put in that foundation, you can now deliver this in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different spaces and places within your digital ecosystem. So I think it's really about where the rubber meets the road and how Nova is expanding where their customers need to expand. And I can't say that enough when it comes to Amazon. Amazon is built on this culture of customer-driven innovation, right? They're not just out there being like, we like LLMs.
Customer
right?
obsession driven.
Well, you know what? But here's the thing, Holger. We all know this. We've all been in organizations.
It's good. It's good. I'm not saying that. Yeah.
No. I'm actually saying that they're not, right? Because I think customer obsession, listen, what happens when people get a little too obsessed with things? They end up in prison. Just saying, it's just where we go with that. But I think what Amazon does,
the Amazon legal obsession about customers, the legal
issues, one, right? But what I think we see with Amazon, and I heard it not just in places like Nova, is that where their customers are going is exceedingly important to Amazon. Amazon and AWS's largest customer is arguably Amazon, but they've also put in operational things, operational triggers that make it very easy for a customer to take advantage of Nova. Look at Marketplace, right? Amazon Paper is super easy to pick up. It's super easy to try some of these applications that have utilized models and foundation models like Nova. Really easy to pick them up in Marketplace, and it's really easy to trust in that and deploy it quickly because it's on Amazon Paper and it has that operational trust already embedded.
But you said the one very important thing, Liz, and the panel made this also clear. AWS is primarily 80, 85, 90% there to serve Amazon. All the direction of their AI work on Nova points to how can I help Amazon become a better, more successful retailer, both in the presentation with customers on the website, with automatically generated videos, interaction, different ways, internally with the Connect, which is close and near to your heart. So that's what you keep in mind as an enterprise customer taking it up. And if any Jassy, by any reason, watches analyst videos too, right, I would throw out the challenge to him. You have to throw in one or two B2B enterprise specific things, right? Things like I can suck in the structure of an ERP system and I create a model for you which has the lingo of the ERP system with then, which should be a conversation. What is a foundation model cake? Back to Larry's question for Nova with customization, right? Do I have to push the customizations of like the lingo of my ERP systems into Nova? Or is it in a separate piece where I can build the model, pay AWS for it because you extract it, because you maintain it for me, but I can put this on different models and again use Bedrock as the Switzerland of AI models for that. So have more enterprise specific pieces, because otherwise the internal serving of AWS would be great for customers in that space. For customers in other verticals, there's going to be a very strong piece forward by the transactional vendors, the EAP vendors front and forward to help understand making AI workable from the way how things are called in the applications. Enterprise users are used to how they call things in the application. They don't want to change that, right?
Is code
I think even business gets to benefit from this type of customer obsession. One, the Nova models themselves, just take it from a pragmatic perspective. Again, we're adulting. The things are getting more ready to operationalize. It's actually, but they're certainly going to be lower cost. And I think you see that up and down the stack. One of the announcements we saw was that they're bringing vectors into S3 bucket, into managed S3, right? So that's also a fundamental way to bring down that cost as memory needs to expand for these things. So again, I think there's the pros and cons to your point. Could you bring in more enterprise for sure? But certainly a ton of that customer obsession, the obsession about AWS itself is going to be back to benefits for the customer as well. Lower costs, better operationalization, better management, observability.
But quickly, Larry, I need to jump on the adulting. So I don't think we're adulting in AI. We're barely learning to crawl, and we might be getting, like the parents might be happy they're getting out of the diapers. Right? That's the phase which we are with AI. But no, over to you.
Wow, I was going to go with interns that need to actually move from teenager to at least into ready to work.
Out of diapers.
Out of diapers. All right.
So is Code Transform that enterprise thing that Holger's looking for?
Yes and no. So super interesting on the Kiro side, right? The announcement, right? From an SDLC perspective, very, very important for everybody who's developer close, like Amazon is, right? Built on developers, to think about what happens in the whole cycle beyond the developer and helping them to do stuff. And Kiro is a great way forward. They need to do this. Other competitors have provided things around the SDLC, which are interesting and in production already. So it will be super interesting to see how the individual developer, which is a big part of the AWS ecosystem, will react to that and say, all this requirement stuff, who cares about this? And then the interesting thing is, how will the managers of developers in the enterprise pick up on that, right? Because I don't want every developer look at the SDLC as live. I want to do it. I want to give them the framework in the enterprise, and that's where you're absolutely right, Larry. I want to give the framework how I want my developers who are paid for a lot of money and to hire and have to keep on board and have to keep happy with ping pong tables and other stuff, will build in a uniform, consistent way. That's the interesting next step of, say, Hero Business, if I can do some naming games here, AWS folks or something. We'll see. But very interesting, very important, strategic, also sign of maturization of the AI stack inside of AWS to move that forward. And again, AWS has tons of developers. Making AWS developers, in-house developers, more productive, it will not hurt the bottom line of the e-tailer giants.
Clearly,
all right,
aimed at the developer, the enterprise developer, for sure. I mean, you get, what was the cost that we saw from McKinsey? What, 90% of app dev occurs after the code is written? And so this type of tool that really gets, helps you, one, get the spec, but align documentation, align all, like you said, the whole software development lifecycle is really getting to that level. How do I scale? And I think it's back to that theme we've been talking about.
All right, let's wrap up with Marketplace. How are we going to buy agents on Marketplace, and is there a new model there to be had?
Well, they did announce in the Marketplace.
At the end of the day, it's all software. Right, and companies have been procuring software for Marketplace since a long time. It's super easy, super convenient, the bundling, all the things. Nothing will change for agents. There's going to be some little more plumbing potentially for that. But even if you buy normal standard software, I have to give access rights to things, I have to give access rights to agents, I have to govern what I'm doing, I have to monitor my spend. So the more I think the cloud platform treats agents like software, the more reutilization and commonality is there with other things people consume, the better. But we'll see how that ends, because everybody's adding agents to the Marketplace. Star. Right? That's what is happening in summer of 2025.
All right, Liz, what's your take?
I think that if we listen to where the partners were trying to take this, I think the partners are really eager to become product vendors for some wild and wacky reason. And I think that they are trying to get into this market, and it's like they're messaging like they're going to be selling entire workforces. Like, hey, come onto the Marketplace and you're going to buy a digital workforce, and it's just going to be, you're just going to buy it. And then you're going to put it in, and then, well, you're going to use us to train it all, right? Like I think that the messaging around that and the modeling around that and just the kind of the mental load that it's going to take for a developer to be like, oh, okay, let me then integrate this into what I'm actually building. Let me integrate this into a model like Holger just talked about of the mental model I know how to build on and from is around buying software, right? So that's how these end customers are buying and consuming and expanding and scaling. Yet I think we have a lot of people who are trying to sell in the marketplace, trying to come up with a very different model. They're trying to, sell the individual worker. They're going to try to sell the individual workforce. We're trying very desperately to anthropomorphize all of these workflows and all of these agents. And I think the challenge there is that if we want to go and buy Bob on the marketplace, right? If we're going in to buy an army of Susans, that's going to get very tricky very quickly when the developers who are trying to build these infrastructures and trying to build all of these kind of software applications on top of a lot of not only the data, but the infrastructure and the systems that we are looking to build, they're going to be like, I didn't need 100 Bobs. Like, thanks so much, SI, who has this product out there. So I think we're starting to see the model change. I don't necessarily know if this is going to be an Amazon needs to sort this out or an AWS needs to sort this out. I think natural attrition and the failure of a lot of these initiatives is going to sort that out. Like, it's like natural selection of agents is pretty much going to start to happen. But what I do think is interesting is that Amazon is having to come up with that mental model of how to explain it. And it comes back to something that Mike, Larry, you, and like all of us, Holger as well, that we tend to really get frustrated with, which is just how much mud is going to get stuck in this messaging well before everyone really gets past what this is.
I just want to know if there's any Karens or Kens available in the.
Probably. It's going to be lots of chat.
Hopefully. Yeah. Who cares for Susan?
I think we're going to overhire agents just like we did during COVID. We're going to hire too many people. I don't know how you lay off an agent, though. I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. Mike, final word. How are we buying agents?
I think we're in for just a great messy experiment going on right now, just because products are being turned into services are being turned into products. And exactly to Liz's point, this is not yet figured out. And we're in for a great experimentation here.
But let me latch on, like Larry, you just turn the agent off, right? And the reorg is super easy. You go from lots of tiny agents, which are too tiny for you and keep your humans too busy, to bigger agents, and you don't have to do any reorg, any layoff notices, and so on. You just transform your agent capabilities into different granularity, which again is something we had before, because remember the API granularity discussion, which we always had on the software development side, that's now the agent granularity discussion, which we'll have. Sorry.
Yeah, but Holger, that gets
saying, how do I lay off an agent? You just turn him off or her off.
Something tells
it gets
me
a little simpler as well.
as
Agents are going to start buying other agents.
Yeah, that too. But you might change the agents, right? Like, you can change agents hopefully easier with the frameworks how to plug them in are more standardized. But right now we're in the agent platform framework competition, so that standardization is a little bit far out. Yeah.
All right, so now we're all looking for a restructuring agent.
All right.
Restructuring agent. Yeah. The consultants will have that. Let me throw this little bomb in here, right? I mean, we spent 4 hours here, like 25% speaking to large AWS partners. And that was thorough a reality check, like how far they are not yet in picking up agent-based platforms. So that was a good reality check, because I thought there would be a little more ahead, but let's leave it there. I'm trying to say it nicely. Can you gloss over, Liz? Can you make it sound better? No?
Can I make it sound better? Probably not. But Larry, I think that you're pulling on an interesting thread, right? It's a how do you turn them off? And I get that from a developer perspective, it's as easy as like just turn it off, Larry. What the hell? Like, just turn it off. But how many times, I mean, this is not the first time that we've had an automated process or an automated workflow that we have neglected to turn off. We forgot it existed because someone built it in there 2 years ago, and now that dude's at another company, right? We don't have all of that. And the reality is, I mean, hey, listen, I'm going to pick on marketing for a second, right? How many times do we forget that there is an automated email workflow somewhere in our system that then accidentally sends an email about how we should all be trying to surf somewhere for the summer when there's a flood happening outside because we forget to turn off the workflow, right? And so I think that this happens. It's not going to be a new thing. I think the battle here is going to be how quickly do we have visibility across all of the agents that we're starting to deploy across the enterprise, because agents and where we are looking for agent core and where we are looking in AWS is not necessarily the only place we're building agents. We're building these things all over the place. And when do they start tumbling? Look at our recording. How many times have we talked over you, Larry? Imagine us as agents. Like, holy hell.
This is like wrangling cats. But on that note, AWS Summit, thanks for the wrap up, folks. Good stuff. Lots to think about. And I guess now we careen into reInvent at the end of the year. Thanks for joining.
Watching.